Hello everybody, welcome back, and thanks for watching. Thank you especially for your patience over the last few months. I was just as surprised as you were when my last channel was taken down, and to be perfectly honest, I was a bit angry and confused about the whole situation. But, you know, there's really no point in harboring any negativity about it. Negativity doesn't change anything except yourself. And, always helpful to be reminded that everybody is really entitled to his or her own opinion. And as you know, I would never, ever want to offend anybody. I know we all have a strong point of view when it comes to language and to biology, and especially to the relationship between the two. So, I'm going to continue to be as mindful of that as I possibly can be, and as sensitive as possible to everybody's needs. So, now that that's out of the way, it's time for us to move on and have a real conversation. As always, I'm so excited to be here with you. As you may notice, I am feeling a little bit under the weather today. I'm at home sick, but I thought, that's as good a time as any to speak out, connect with my community, and speak to you and hear what you have to say to me. Please know that, as always, I'm here for you and that I hear you. So today I'm going to be talking to you all about verbal aspect. I had been hearing previously a lot of feedback from you guys in the comment section about moving on from articles and emphasis, salience. So, just a lot of different ways of saying the same thing. Really, we're sick of hearing about object relations. So your message came through loud and clear, and today we are moving on to a topic that, while still rooted in a similar phenomenological framework, is far less focused on objects and object relation and attention. Articles, emphasis, salience, all of that was very contemplative and slow. This is going to be much more active. It's going to be about time and action and agency. So I think it's going to be very exciting and interesting for you. I know that for many of you, it will be fairly basic, as you are already quite familiar with these terms and concepts in depth. But, if that's the situation, then it's always okay to just soak it in and take some time to reaffirm the knowledge that you already possess. Okay, so first things first, what is verbal aspect? You probably already speak or have at least a basic mastery of a Slavic language, but if for some reason you don't, and if that's the case, that's totally okay. This is probably a relatively unfamiliar idea. And to be clear, most languages have some way of communicating verbal aspects. So if you don't speak a Slavic language, don't worry. You'll be able to understand, and you won't have to feel left out at all. We can use some examples from your language too. I'm sure that whatever language or languages you speak are just great, just super languages. Really, don't feel badly at all if you don't speak a Slavic language. It's nothing to worry about. You are doing a great job, always. Just take a minute and, just pat yourself on the back for doing such a good job. The reason we're just talking about Slavic languages now, it's not that anything's wrong with you or the language you speak. It's just that Slavic languages do tend to place the most emphasis on verbal aspect, and that can help us to start to recognize other places where it may appear in less obvious ways. So that's just an important thing to start out by honoring and acknowledging as we move forward in our discussion of this topic. So let's back up just a little bit and go over some basic definitions. So to start, what is verbal aspect? did ask that question just a moment ago, but I didn't do a great job of fully answering it. And that's entirely my fault and my failing. I was being a bad listener to myself, and I really apologize for that. I'm setting a terrible example for you all. So, moving forward, I will do my best to try to honor my own voice and listen to you as attentively as you listen to me, really as attentively as I listen to all of you in return. I'm so sorry. I have to back up even further and talk about the overall definition of aspect before we can even really move on to verbal aspect, which I'm sure you knew, and I appreciate your not pointing that out right away and letting me come to that recognition on my own. That's incredibly gracious of you. So, to those of you who are already well versed in these basic definitions, which I'm sure you are, I apologize even further for potentially boring you with all of this primary groundwork. I know it must be difficult to be so advanced and have such an in-depth knowledge of these topics and to have to listen to this, but I really do appreciate your patience. So, where were we? Aspect, basic definitions. Aspect in general refers to an object or action's boundedness, which is another way of saying whether or not it has a defined quantity, or even more simply, does it have a beginning or an end. You're probably most familiar with this idea as it applies to nouns, whether you are aware of it or not. You probably are, but in some cases you might not always be. So specifically the idea of a mass or count noun, with a mass noun being an entity that can be described with a singular term regardless of the quantity and has no plural form, like milk or hair or blood or garbage. In most cases, you can specify the quantity if you'd like. For example, saying 1 strand of hair, or 3 quarts of milk, or 100 pails of garbage. And that specification will confer a sense of boundedness, but unless that extra step is taken to specify quantity, the mass noun will always be somewhat elusive and amorphous. For example, if you were to say to me, you have blood in your hair, how much blood are you talking about? Is there a drop of blood on a single strand of hair? Or is 1/2 of my head covered in blood? It's really quite unclear based on that phrase alone, but here's the magic. When you say it, you already know. The answer is inside of you, inside your head, and inside your imagination. And if you don't have the answer already, that's fine too. Maybe you exclaimed that fact out loud before you could even truly perceive the quantity. You saw the presence of blood in my hair and immediately notified me, knowing that the specific amount was inconsequential, really, when you get down to it. In which case, good for you. That was absolutely the right call to make in that situation. You did the right thing. You thought on your feet and you made a smart decision. You did a great job. You expressed exactly as much information as necessary, which is really the biggest obstacle to tackle when it comes to effective communication. So, mass and count are the terms that we use to describe aspect in nouns, just to recap. But let's move on to the topic at hand. So verbs and verbal aspect, shall we? For verbs and verbal aspect, the correlating term to mass and count are perfective and imperfective. This is probably quite obvious to you already, but just to spell out the connection a bit further, which is mostly because it helps me out and not because I think you need this kind of explanation, mass is connected to imperfective and count is connected to perfective. This probably goes without saying, but these are not straight one-to-one mappings, just some helpful connections in case you're struggling even a little bit at all with the concept of aspect as it applies to verbs. I really do doubt that you're struggling, but I'm sure this is quite seamless and easy for you. But just in case, if for some reason it's not coming as fluidly as it used to, then maybe this kind of equivalency or comparison can help make the connection. And if that's the case, that's just between you and me. So, the same way that mass nouns are unbounded and somewhat indefinite and fluid, imperfective verbs are similarly unbounded and somewhat indefinite and fluid. Likewise, perfect verbs indicate boundedness and completion in the same way that count nouns are bounded, complete, and final. So, now that we've established that basic correlation, let's really get down to business and talk about what boundedness means in a verbal context. It may have been a little bit easier or more natural to grasp how the idea of boundedness applies to nouns, but I'm completely confident that you'll have no trouble at all extending that understanding to verbs. That is, if you don't have a complete understanding already and are just using this as a refresher, or maybe you're doing something really nice and sharing this explanation with somebody who doesn't understand it as well as you, and you want to help them reach the same understanding that you have, but in sort of a subtle and potentially less embarrassing way, in which case that's a really nice thing you're doing for your friend. So, just to review, a noun's boundedness was mainly defined by its quantity. We could ask ourselves at any point, is there a specific amount of this object, or are we just talking about some indefinite general presence? But for a verb, what would it mean for a verb to have a finite quantity or an indefinite quantity? I'm sure you know what the answer is already, but I'll just go ahead and say it anyway, just to keep us moving. So the answer is time. A verb can't be quantified in terms of any physical unit like weight or volume, but we can consider it in terms of duration or completion. So here's an example. Let's say I were to tell you that I'm reading the obituaries. Just imagine that you called me up on the phone and you asked, Sasha, what are you doing tonight? And I'd say, thanks for asking, friends. Tonight I'm reading the obituaries. From your perspective, there's no indication of how long I've been doing it, or when I'll stop, or if I've done anything else before, or if I plan on doing anything after. And most importantly, for an English speaker, those questions may not even occur to you right away. Of course, I don't mean to make you feel badly or inadequate by bringing that up. If you are an English speaker, a native English speaker, and those questions did not in fact occur to you at first, please don't feel badly. I just wanted to point it out because this is really the core of what makes this topic so interesting and relevant to our overall studies in cognitive linguistics. While you as an English speaker may not have asked yourself any questions related to duration or completion, you probably ask yourself a different set of equally valid and relevant questions. Those questions were most likely related to tense. When did the action I just described take place in relation to the present moment? And those are great questions to ask. Those are truly, truly important questions. So if that's where your mind was in that moment, then you should feel absolutely great about that. I thought it might be a fun thing to do, to look at a few example sentences and constructions so we can start to see how this looks in practice. I have put together for you some sample sentences in Czech because that is the Slavic language that I'm personally the most So, just to clarify, this is not an endorsement specifically of Czech or any kind of dig on whatever language you're using and the most comfortable with. It's really just a matter of personal preference. So, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead. I'll just give you two related sentences in Czech, and then just in case they're not clear to you, I'll do a quick translation and highlight the differences between the verbs as I'm talking, just to make sure that we're on the same page. All right, so here we go. So, example 1. Eva si kupila nože. Eva bought herself some knives. She went outside. She came back with some number of knives, which are currently in her possession. The act is complete. That's what we can understand from that sentence. Eva šla nakupovat. Eva went shopping. In this case, we're not necessarily sure for how long she went shopping. If she's still out, this is a little bit more ambiguous. Example 2. Řekli jsme mu, aby odešel. We told him to leave. Pořád mu říkáme, aby odešel. We keep telling him to leave. So you can see in those two, essentially the same sentence or construction, although in the first one you are talking about something, in the past, first of all, and something that has been completed. The situation is no longer in progress. This person has been told to leave for whatever reason, and that's it. We don't know if he left or not, but what's clear is that the action being described is complete. Second construction, we keep telling him to leave. Pořád mu říkáme, aby odešel. In that case, it's, again, it's, the implication is continuing to happen. It's not over. It might be happening at this very moment, or it might be something that is, going on a semi-regular basis while other things are going on as well. So hopefully that was clear. Okay, on to example 3, final example. First construction. Přečtu si to necrolog dnes večer. I'll read that obituary later tonight. Second construction. Dnes večer budu číst necrology. I will read the obituaries tonight. So in the first construction, as you can see, that implied heavily that I will sit down at some point. I will sit down and read the obituaries. I will read them from beginning to end, and then it will be over. I'll be done reading them. The second construction, also in the future tense, but with the heavy implication that, this might be something I do over the course of the evening. It's not necessarily clear when in the sequence of events I might do it. I might be doing it for a while, and most importantly, the implication is that I might not finish. It's much more about the activity of reading. So, in that case, I think you can really start to see how English has a harder time communicating those two things. In the translation sentences, they seem much more similar, whereas in the original Czech, which I'm sure you picked up on, they're quite different. So, those were our example sentences. I hope that they were helpful to you, or if you already had a firm grasp of the topic, which is more than likely that you already did. I hope that this was an enjoyable discussion and refresher for you. If you have any suggestions or examples of sentences that you think illustrate verbal aspect and how it works in whatever language you prefer, whatever language you speak, please submit them in the comment section below. I always love to hear from you, and hear your feedback. So please let me know what you think and what you're thinking about.